If you're not familiar with what I'm holding right here, this is a Kydexed Enzo. You can see the title there, Enzo Trapper 95. Brisa and Enzo are the same company. They're in Finland, and they make knives as well as selling knife materials. And they're really famous for this model, though. This is the Trapper 95. It's done really, really well. I think it's probably one of their higher sellers. But they've decided to just kind of go with the term Brisa. That is their new company name. So I don't think you're going to be seeing the words Enzo on blades anymore. This is one of my favorites. It's an M2 steel. If you can see that, M2 is definitely, it's at least on the edge of being a super steel. And you don't see it much anymore. It's an awesome, awesome blade. Really like this one. Heavily used. Keeps an edge forever, though. Definitely a top blade. Decent handle, too. And something in these lines is you'll see a similar handle on a lot of the variations. And actually, they sent me something I'm pretty interested to check out here. This is a new model, or newer to them, newer to me, model called the Nessmuk. And so if you're familiar with George Washington Sears, an explorer, outdoorsman type, this was a blade that kind of became famous with him. Nessmuk design, and it's got a big hump on the blade portion. Just looks kind of different. It's unique. A blade that was used a lot for meat working as well. Kitchen to woods. It could really do it all. But this was a design he popularized, and it's awesome. This is a Brisa kit knife, and so you can greatly reduce the price of the knife if you're just willing to do the simple task of purchase the sheath separately and put on the scales yourself, which is really not hard. A little bit of sanding work, super easy. Alright, so when you get your kit, you can get some handles like this with some micarta, and these have a red liner which is already attached, and it's basically fit. You don't have to really do much excess work on this. I think they've started trimming a little bit to make it just that much more streamlined, which is really cool. Holes are drilled. This is really nice micarta, actually. I'm impressed. That's awesome. I like it. It looks good. With the blade, one thing I'll say is I already did this, but take a rag and wipe down the blade. Any excess oils, just dry is good when you put those scales on. My little girl's curious what I'm doing right now. Daddy's putting a knife together. Fancy knife. Looks really good. I like this, guys. This is cool. And of course, it comes with these brass pins that are threaded, slotted. So the next thing I do is I just check the fit. So I haven't put any epoxy in. I just grabbed those, grabbed a slotted screwdriver, tightened them up, short them up to see how that fit's going to look, see if there's anything odd or problematic. I wouldn't expect any, because honestly, everything was really nice. The packaging was nice, the blade is nice, the micarta is awesome. It was done so well. I really feel like they take a lot of pride in the way they construct knives, what they build, what comes out of their factory. I really think they do a wonderful job. But I just check those scales over, pretty much any project knife I do, just to see if everything's going to fit real well. I'm going to be able to tighten it up. Nothing got warped. It's kind of the main idea. And this looks perfect, so I'm going to go ahead and grab some epoxy. So I thought I'd just give you a quick close-up, looking over those scales that I polished. And this whole knife, guys, I put together, and the only things I've used to create it were a file. I used a Mill Bastard, kind of a pretty soft file. I just went slowly against the brass pins, tried to not nick any of the micarta. I wanted as much micarta there as possible. And then I used some sandpaper, and it's not perfect. You can see a couple lines, plus I've been using it for a while. It's not in perfect condition right now. One unique thing that I did, which I wouldn't recommend just trying something like this, but if you already kind of know what you're doing a little bit, let me flip it over here. I did a liner of my own. So the red liner is what comes with this package. And then I did a birch bark liner. I just wanted to add a little bit more width to it because I have large hands, probably extra large, And so I just thought it would be fun just to try, mess around with this one, which is what these kits are about. You know, it's about putting your own flair to it and trying it out in a way that you think seems best, shaping things completely how you like them. And I did it with 3 tools. So with, let's see, the file, which was just to get those pins down essentially, and a little bit of the micarta, and then some sandpaper to round it out just a little bit. They come with just a little bit of a square corner, and then you can sand it down to the smoothness that you like. And then I did polish it with a brush, a wheel that was on a drill. So these are all like super cheap things. And I used a vise, of course. You need a vise. Any knife project, you're going to need a vise. Go and buy one, a good one. And this was an awesome project. Went together really quickly. It probably took me an hour. I used some quick epoxy, and it was ready to go. One thing I'll tell you that is if you do polish it, as you can tell here, it does darken those scales. And I'll put this down just so you can see some of that texture there. It does absorb some of that polish. See if we can zoom in a little bit more. It absorbs some of that polish. And it just darkens it up a little bit. I don't actually mind, but they do come in this color much lighter. So if you want to keep them light, probably don't polish them. Find another avenue. I like those red liners though. Those red liners really pop. Look really nice on the blade. Again, I didn't do a perfect job here. I use my knife, so it's not much use. I'm going to have a patina on it and probably a week more of using it. Really great handle though. The way I want it, creating it the way I want it. Smooth, a little thicker than normal. Not blocky though. I really like it. I also sanded out and removed a little bit of the hip here, a little bit down here, which I do on all my Enzos, and then removed the nub here. Just that's the way I like it. That's why I wanted a kit knife. So far, so good. So, let's talk about the design of the actual blade. So the design of the actual blade is very good. I like the sweeping blades. There's a few companies that have made something like this recently, and they're all doing really well for a reason. It gives you almost more cutting surface, if you think about it. Instead of being a straight line from point A through the blade to point B, you have this sweep that goes along the bottom there, and it gives you more cutting surface technically. It's a nice high Scandi grind. I really like it. This isn't meant to be a chopper or anything like that. This is meant to give you a nice slicing capability along with carving, woodworking, a little bit of food prep, of course. And I think that's how George Washington Sears would have used the original Nessmuk for just those kind of tasks. Certainly you could baton with it. Mine happened to come with, I believe, a micro bevel on the Scandi, and I'm going to tell you, it was insanely sharp. I'm not sure if I'll be able to zoom in too well on this. I think you might be able to see right about there. There is a micro bevel on that Scandi, and it is crazy sharp. This has got to be one of the sharpest knives I've ever received. Really nice job on that. I'll just comment one thing here. There was one spot, if I'm going to nitpick, there was one spot, you can see that I've touched it up with my work sharp just a little bit, where the micro bevel was not. So they were pretty consistent right up to here, and there wasn't much of a micro bevel, and it probably would be kind of hard in the factory to do it perfectly every time. So I'm not going to get upset about that because it was still very sharp, but I just touched it up so it's perfect. And now it's in line with the rest of the edge. Absolutely perfect. Shave hair off your arm, easy, actually right off your face. You wouldn't even know it. It was so sharp that I almost cut myself when I first was doing a hair shave check on that edge. It just really bites in. I like it. The thickness, this is a pretty good stock thickness for any knife and the things that I do in that range. I don't really like much thicker. I do like thin knives generally, but this is about as thick as I go, and it's perfect for a little bit of meat, a little bit of strength. Gives you a little more thickness in hand. And the broadness is great. That gives you more shearing power when you're cutting through meat, especially, or through wood, that kind of thing. And some heft. And actually, I'll tell you, the balance point really surprised me. So I thought this would be a blade heavy design. But if you can see here, try to get it zoomed in. If you can see here, it's actually right at the ricasso, or whatever this first finger position is called. That's where the blade balance point is. And so it's not overly blade heavy. Like I said, it's not going to be a chopper, it's more of a carving knife. But this lends to a little bit more controllability in the hand because it's not a big heavy front knife. You know, if all the weight is up there, it's a little harder to control and wield. If it's all in the hand, it gives you more control, like your fighting knives and stuff are handle heavy. And when you have something in the middle, it gives you a good in-between ability to, you know, still chop a little bit of meat, cut through some stuff, small limbs, that kind of thing. Very even in all ways. I really like this design. Handle scales, like I said, I designed the final look here, but the basic shape comes from Brisa, and I think it's a great design. It's fit on many knives for a reason. They have a few different designs that wear these types of scales, and it just seems to fit a lot of people's hands very well. I'm basically done talking about the looks of the knife. That's not always the part that I care about. I care about how does it work, so let's go use it a little bit. So that was disappointing. It's too cold out. Killed my phone camera battery. I had to warm it up by the fire a little bit here. But, so, the Nessmuk design from Brisa. It's a pretty good design. I like that it has some historic roots. I think you would enjoy this blade even more if you were to pick up George Washington Sears' book about bushcraft, woodscraft, survival. I think you'd enjoy the knife even more, just seeing what he was able to do with such a knife. The things that I think I appreciate the most about it is, first of all, it's definitely a bend towards meat working and utility. The original was probably a full flat grind, from what I understand. I prefer Scandies, and this one came with a micro bevel on the edge, I believe, or just the kiss of a micro bevel. It might have even just been the polishing. So it's not a true Scandi all the way, and I think I like this better because it's a very high Scandi grind. It's a fantastic looking blade. Really like it. And so a little bit more strength on the edge is probably a good idea because this guy digs in deep. This is a piece of oak here. When I first got it, that's exactly what I mean. When I first got it, I started messing around with it, and I was like, holy cow, this thing is super sharp. It almost cut me when I would touch the hair on my arm. I would just touch it, and it would almost cut me. And so it's not a problem of not being sharp enough. Trust me, it digs in deep. I would say meat-wise, the advantage of such a blade is in a normal knife. Let me take out like my folding knife here. Normal blade, the bush ranger is about the size of a normal woods knife. And you know, this is even a little bit more broad than some. So you can get up here and you can kind of hold onto it here if you're working with meat or you're slicing through skinning. But with this blade, it is so broad that you can actually get a really good purchase on it. And in fact, you can get your finger a little ahead of the edge in a sense. So when you're skinning, you're running a knife through a deer. If you didn't know this, you got to be careful about the gut sac and some of the lining there. And when you're slicing up, you know, you make your little poke hole and you're slicing up, you can pretty much just feel right up to the esophagus area as you're sliding the knife through the skin there. And so this has an advantage of, it definitely has a point. You can see that. In fact, it's a nice point. It's functional. Works really well for bow drills. Find a piece of wood here. I don't have a broad piece of wood for something like a bow drill, but it actually digs in, I'd say almost just as well as my regular, you know, kind of straight blades that don't have so much belly. Still has a functional point on it to dig in. But it's also kind of a protector when you're running it through meat. And you can hold onto it and get up here. If you're the kind of person who, I don't so much do this, but I know some people do. They like to hold onto a blade like this, and when they're carving on spoons particularly, they like to use this because there's a lot of control. When you have a bigger blade like this, if you're just holding her like this, you might slip. You're a little less in control, but when you get like this, especially with that point, you can get down and do some really small curls or take off very small amounts of wood on a spoon, especially when you're talking about the handle area and you're getting around the bowl. If you want to have a fine control point, this right here is really hard to beat because you're actually holding the blade. You're like a millimeter away from the edge itself. And so surprisingly, this is a surprise to me. The finesse is definitely there. And then you can still use it to dig in a lot and get a big chunk taken out. It bites in extremely well. I mean, almost cut through the whole piece of wood. It bites in extremely well, really fast. And so, if anything, you got to be a little more careful. With a normal knife, you might not be prepared to have, or you might not be used to having a knife that can cut through that much wood that fast. It really digs in well. And so that's an advantage for me. It's less work. It's easier. I'll tell you something about this steel. This is like 80 CR something or other steel. It's a high carbon steel. And I don't see it as much as some of the super steels that everybody talks a lot about, but this might as well be one. This is a really hard, rugged piece of steel. I've had great results with it so far. The only thing I have ever done to this blade was because it came with a micro edge till about here, I did touch up a spot right here from the factory, just a little bit, a tiny little bit, not enough to complain about. I would complain if it bothered me, but not enough, just a little bit. So this 80 CR steel, all I've ever done is run it over a leather strop that I made. I just touched it, and it's razor sharp. I mean, I'm almost afraid to try to shave with it because it'll cut me, but yeah, guys, it's scary sharp. After 2 weeks, 3 weeks now. After 3 weeks of actually using it relatively hard, using it through hardwoods like oak, a little bit of birch and maple and some softer stuff, but actually using it. I'm plowing it through wood, I'm batoning and cross-batoning with it. Quite a few notches. I don't know why, I just sit around the fire and make notches sometimes. It's done really well to hold that edge. One thing I will say is because of that belly with feather sticks specifically, it took me about 10 minutes of messing around with it just to kind of figure out that angle. Because what happens with something like this is, in a normal knife when it's straight, you can kind of ride through the plane of wood. You kind of push it through as it slices through. And with this, I guess you could do that, but it tends to collect a lot of the material down here. If you've never had a blade like this, it really doesn't tend to slip up past this point right here. Usually it stays right in here. So the most used part of my blades are usually here anyways, but it kind of doesn't want to move past that point. And so you just kind of have to learn how to do that, because if you do move past that point, you start to move, you start to go deeper into the wood. So it's just functionally a little different. It might even be better than some of the other blades that I've used. You know, comparison to the Enzo kits that I've had with the Trapper 95, which I really like. I have one in, one in 01, which I put some scales on of my own. And then I have a Trapper 95 with birch bark scales. And the handles that they come with, the scales that they come with, the Micarta or the birch bark, are really quality, guys. It's good stuff. It's not junk. It's definitely worth the money. Something unique that I did, I'm sure I already mentioned this in a previous part, but as I put my own birch bark liners in here just to give it a little more thickness. I'm a big guy, I have big hands, and I just wanted to try around with it. I've had a few of these kits, so I wanted to see what I could do. One of the things I always do with these kits, and I'll just pass it on your way, you can do what you like, but because of the way that I use a knife, if you're ever going to do like reverse cuts and stuff, it's really nice to be able to have smooth edges. Wow. It just cuts through the whole thing. It's nice to have smooth edges everywhere. You know, bushcraft knives, you don't want to have sharp edges anywhere that cause discomfort. You want a nice rounded grip so you can kind of hold it any direction. So that's basically what I did to these scales. The only tools I needed, again, I needed a vise to hold the blade. I needed some sandpaper and a metal rasp. And so I don't recommend a wood rasp because you have brass, so you're going to need a metal rasp. But that's not a lot of money of an investment, and those are tools you should have anyways in your workshop. You know, back to the knife. The things I did, I just smoothed it out enough. I want to keep as much material on there as possible, smooth it out enough here. I really tend to smooth this part out on these Trapper 95 style handles and scales. I smooth this part out here because, again, if you're holding it in reverse, this is going against your chest, and if this is a sharp point right here, that'll agitate you, that'll annoy you. So I round it out so it's smooth. I don't even feel it when I'm doing chest levers. And then on the front here, because I always choke up when I hold a knife, it usually comes with kind of a pronounced point right about here. And all I did was, if you can see that, if I can get close enough, I just rounded it out, smoothed it out. Didn't have to do anything to the spine. The spine came extremely sharp. It was awesome. Really sharp. Strikes a fire steel really, really well. I haven't tried it yet with flint, and I should, because I don't know about ECR. I don't know if that's something that strikes off of flint very well. If it does, awesome. I love to do that. It is a high carbon steel, so I suspect it might work. I know 01 and 1095 have no problem with it. Other than that, a few things, a few points that I noticed where the blade came with kind of a darkened protection right here. I don't recommend particularly that you strip that because it is a high carbon steel. It looks cooler, I think, anyways, having the dual tone. When I worked on this part, sanding this down, I did strip it, but don't worry about that because your hand patina, just from your oils, you're going to darken it back up and it's going to match this blade in no time. If you wanted to even speed that process up, you could put a light patina of something on there, vinegar, mustard, ketchup, whatever you're willing to risk. You could try that if you sand it out and you want it to match. But man, honestly, using the knife, give me 2 weeks from now even, and I'll stop wiping it down. I probably won't care so much about the looks of it, and it's just going to be a user. It's going to be a tool, which is what it is. It'll all match up. But those red liners, again, really cool. Looks awesome. It's just a fun blade to use in the winter. It reminds me of the kind of guy that George Washington Sears was. You know, he's a mountain man, essentially. A bushcrafter. And you can see why such a blade style design lived on. Working with meat, working with wood, even just basic utility. It's a pretty cool knife. You know, when I take out some of my regular knives, people look at them, oh, that's a cool knife. What kind is it? Maybe, you know, maybe they care, maybe they don't. But when you take something out like this, people say, what is that? What's the story on that knife? Because it's just unique enough. It's different enough. You know, I'm not a huge guy into the aesthetics of tools. I just want it to work pretty well. That's when I get the most joy out of it. But this aesthetically is unique. It's cool, especially if you pair it with the original sheath that they had made for it. It's a good look. Functions very well. The micarta, this is a modern material. It's not wood. The micarta is really sweet though. I think it's probably some of the cooler micarta I've seen. Has a little bit of that burlap look, coyote coloration after I did go ahead and smooth it out and then put some, what is it called? I polished the edges of everything here. That's what I was trying to think of the word. Polished it up, darkened it up a little bit. I would say if you have, I'm 6'5", about 230 pounds. If you have bigger hands than I do, I would say this knife could fit, just a little bit bigger. But this is going to be a good size handle for the medium populace. It's for small hands, definitely it'll work great. Up to my large size hands, great. If you have extra large hands, you might dig in a little bit here. Depends how you use the knife. Depends how aggressive you have to hold it. One of the advantages of this knife, the high grind and how sharp it is you don't have to hold on to it quite as tight to push through. There's less resistance there because it is just so sharp. This knife is just crazy sharp. When you can push through a piece of wood that fast, you don't have to hold on to it quite as tight. So it doesn't really bother me. I like a lot about it. If you have any questions, I want you to go ahead and comment down below. These can be found for right around the $100 price point right now. The kits may be cheaper around Christmas time. There's usually deals. They're going to start filtering into the States. I know I have a sheath coming from Thompson Knives, so they are carrying a sheath for these. They maybe perhaps even have the kits right now. I don't know. I'm not affiliated with Thompson Knives, so I'm not going to say too much more about that. But I would suggest pick one of these up, especially if you enjoyed the Enzo Brisa Trapper 95. This is just that much cooler. That's what I think anyways. Appreciate your views, guys. Thanks. Like, share, subscribe.